Hello everyone and welcome back to STUDIFYSUCCESS. We are back again with another chapter which is our environment from class 10th. You can access the notes of this chapter from the description section, and for further study material or any notes you can visit our website which is studifysuccess.com. So this chapter can be a little monotonous when you read it from the book. So here we are with concise notes of this chapter, and we'll start with ecosystem. Firstly, the name is our environment. So environment are the surroundings which surround us. So what is an ecosystem? We may have heard about it. Ecosystem is the combination or the interaction between the living organisms and the non-living organisms. So how the living and non-living, if you even see in your surroundings, you can see there are various living components and various non-living components which are interacting in the environment and interacting with each other so that life can sustain. So such a interaction is called an ecosystem. So here we can have a look at the definition, which is all the interacting or the living organisms. Living organisms are the interacting organisms. So all the living organisms in an area together with the non-living constituents of the environment forms an ecosystem. So living organisms with the non-living organisms together form an ecosystem. So now we know what are the components of the ecosystem. We know it from the definition itself. These are the living organisms and the non-living components. So the living organisms are called the biotic components. Living organisms are called the biotic components. Bio represents life. So living organisms have life in them. That is why they are called biotic components. Non-living components do not have life in them. That is why they are called abiotic. Abiotic means without life. So these organisms are without life. That is why they are called abiotic components. So some examples of these abiotic components can be rainfall, soil, temperature, air, water. Okay, so in order to understand more, let us have a look at an example. So here in this picture, we have a pond ecosystem. Here you can see various living organisms and various non-living organisms. Let us just list it out. Here I have already listed out it for you. So the biotic components or the living components or the living organisms here in this picture, we have the frog, we have these tadpoles, we have these little flies, the snail, the fish in the water, these water weeds, these are plants. Plants are also living organisms. This grass, all these are living organisms. And the biotic components. The abiotic components will be this water. Firstly, this sun. The sunlight coming from the sun is the primary abiotic component. Then the air which is present here, the nutrients which are present in the soil and in the water, the minerals, all these are the abiotic components. So these abiotic components and these biotic components are interdependent on each other, which means without these abiotic components, the biotic components won't be able to survive. So these are interdependent and they interact with each other to form a pond ecosystem. So this is all what an ecosystem is. So now we know what an ecosystem is. Moving ahead with the types of ecosystem, we have two types of ecosystem, natural and artificial. Again, as the name suggests, natural ecosystem is the one which occurs in nature by itself. So there is no human intervention in between, there is no human support which is required for that ecosystem. So it is a combination of biotic and abiotic factors which coexist without human intervention. They do not need any human support, they do not need our support, they can occur on their own. For example, natural ponds, forests. So if you look at a forest, the forest does not need human support to survive. The forest survives on its own. All the natural forests, ponds, and lakes are examples of natural ecosystems. Then we have the artificial ecosystem. Again, as the name tells us, that this is an artificial system. Because why is it artificial? Because it requires our intervention to continue it, to help it survive. For example, a crop field. A farmer's crop field requires the intervention of a farmer to sustain. It cannot sustain without the help of a farmer. For example, if less water is present there, the the land needs the farmer for that abiotic component water to give it to them. So that is why crop field, gardens, reservoirs and aquariums. Aquariums are made by us. If we do not put a fish in the aquarium, that aquarium will not become a proper ecosystem. So that is why all these are artificial ecosystems. So now we know what an ecosystem is. Ecosystem consists of the biotic and abiotic components. Now we are going to study the biotic factors further. These biotic factors consist of producers, consumers, and the decomposers. These are further divided into these three subcategories. So coming to the producers, as the name suggests, producers are the one which produce. So no one in the world except the producers can produce food. Only the producers or the autotrophs can produce food with the help of sunlight. So we know that this process is called photosynthesis. So all the green plants and some bacteria which can produce their own food by the process of photosynthesis are called producers. We also call them autotrophs. So all the plants come under this category. Then we have the consumers. Consumers, as the name suggests, which consume. They cannot make their own food, so they consume the food prepared by the producers. They are dependent on the producers. So these organisms which consume the food produced either directly by the producers, these consumers may directly feed on the producers. Or the second option is these consumers may feed on other consumers as well. They may eat other consumers which are eating producers. At last, everyone is feeding on the producers directly or indirectly. So these consumers can further be divided as herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, or parasites. Herbivores, name suggests herbivores. Let's break it down. The word herb means they feed on herbs and plants. We have the carnivores which feed on other animals, and then we have the omnivores. Omnivores are a mix of both carnivores and herbivores. Omnivores feed on both plants and animals. They feed on both of them. And then we have the parasites. So some people may get confused with parasites and carnivores. They are both different. So carnivores feed on other animals, but those other animals are not able to survive as well. They kill them and then they feed on them. Whereas the parasites feed on other animals without killing them, but it secretly deprives the host animal of its important nutrients. It gets stuck on one animal and then it sucks its nutrients out. So it deprives it of nutrients without even killing it. So this is a parasite. Then we have the third type of biotic organisms, which are the decomposers, which are very important for our environment. So once a person dies or a plant dies or any living organism dies, we cannot leave it there as it is. So that living matter has to be converted back to nutrients, and those nutrients need to go into the soil again for the reincarnation of the life. So that job is done by the decomposer. Decomposers are the microorganisms. These are very minute organisms which break down the dead and decaying complex organic matter. So we all, the plant, the animals, all are the organic matters. So these decomposers break down this complex organic matters into simple inorganic substances. So simple inorganic substances like simple phosphates, nitrogens, and in this manner they break them. These simple inorganic substances can now penetrate deep into the soil, and these nutrients can be taken again by the plants and again they can grow out of it. So these are the decomposers. Now we have the three types: the producers, which produce the food by photosynthesis; the consumers, which directly or indirectly are dependent on the producers; and the decomposers, which feed on the dead and decaying plants and convert complex organic matter into simple inorganic substances. So our next topic is food chain and food webs. So now we know what are the components of ecosystem. These are the biotic components and the abiotic components. Food chain and food webs typically describes the interaction of these components. How are they interacting? This can be depicted in food chains and food webs. Starting with food chains. Food chain is a linear series of organisms feeding on one another at various biotic levels. What does this mean? Linear series means it is a straight line series. You can see here it is in a straight line. Okay, and it is one direction. Grass is being eaten by grasshopper, which is being eaten by a frog, and which is being eaten by a snake. So you can see it is unidirectional. It is moving only in one direction. So it is a linear series of organisms. Here we have various type of organisms feeding on one another. So these organisms are feeding on one another. This grasshopper is feeding on the grass. This frog is feeding on the grasshopper. The snake is feeding on the frog. So all these organisms are feeding on one another at various biotic levels. What are these biotic levels? Let us see. Each step or a level of the food chain forms a trophic level. So what is this trophic level? For example, we have this grass. This grass is the producer, we know this. Then this grasshopper is the consumer, or it is the first consumer, so it is called the primary consumer. Then this frog is the secondary consumer. This snake is the tertiary consumer, which means the third consumer. So we have various consumers as well, primary, secondary and tertiary. So all these represent various levels of the food chain. These various levels are called the trophic levels. So each step or the level of a food chain forms a trophic level. So this grass forms a trophic level, all the grasshoppers form a trophic level, frogs form a trophic level, and snake forms a trophic level. So moving on, the autotrophs or the producers are at the first trophic level. So at the base, we can see here at the base we have the producers. These producers or autotrophs form the basic or the baseline trophic level. They fix up the solar energy and make it available for the heterotrophs or the consumer. Now we have the sun. Sun is the primary source of energy. Everyone gets their energy from the sun. So energy is taken from the sun by the producers. No other organism can take energy. So only the producers can absorb the energy by the sun. So they absorb the energy from the sun. Then the energy is transferred from producers to small herbivores. Then this energy is further transported to secondary consumers and then to tertiary consumers. This is how energy flows in a food chain. So let us read further. The herbivores or the primary consumers come at the second trophic level. We have seen that. Then these herbivores are being eaten by the secondary consumers, which are the small carnivores. So small carnivores or the secondary consumers at the third, and the larger carnivores, the supreme ones, like we have the lion, tiger, eagle, which cannot be eaten further by any other. So the largest form of carnivores are at the third trophic level and are the tertiary consumers. So now we know what are trophic levels. We have seen this example of food chain as well, where grass is the producer, grasshopper is the primary consumer, frog is the secondary consumer, and snake is the tertiary consumer. Okay, so this diagram depicts the trophic level. So these trophic levels, this is the first trophic level, then the second trophic level, the third and the fourth. Generally and mostly the last trophic level represents the tertiary or the largest carnivores. Moving ahead. So now we know what a food chain is. It is a linear series. The chain word represents it is a linear series. Okay, it is only one way and there is only one chain. Food web. The name itself tells us that it is a web of various chains. So in reality, we do not have one chain existing in the environment separately. So we don't see that, okay, grasshopper is only being eaten by a frog, or a frog is only being eaten by a snake and no one else, or a frog is only eating a grasshopper and nothing else. A frog may eat various other insects. So all the time in our environment, various food chains are colliding and they are interacting with each other and forming a food web. So they are interconnected. So let us see here in this diagram. Here we have a food chain. We have the plants, which are the producer. These plants are eaten by the deer, which is the primary consumer. Then this deer is eaten by the wolf, which is a secondary consumer, and again the wolf is being degraded by the decomposers. Okay, so let us see an example of the web as well. So here we have the plants. The plants are eating, the grasshopper is eating the plant, then the bird is eating the grasshopper. Now you saw that the frog was also eating the grasshopper in the earlier example, and the bird is also eating the grasshopper. Also the ground squirrel is also eating the grasshopper. Okay, then this bird is being eaten by the fox and by another large birds as well. Eagle is also eating the bird and the frog is also eating the bird. So here we can see various food chains are being connected, or various food chains are colliding and branching, forming a web-like structure. In real life, food chains do not exist. Food webs exist. We see food webs, they are interconnections of various food chains. No food chains exist separately in the environment. There is always interconnection of various food chains. So each organism is generally eaten by two or more kinds of organisms, which means there is not only one organism which is one eating another organism. So there are two or more organisms which are eating one organism. Like we have various organisms which are eating plants. The deer is also eating the plant, the grasshopper is also eating the plant. Similarly, we have frog which is also eating the grasshopper, we have ground squirrel which is eating the grasshopper, we have bird also which is eating the grasshopper. So we have two or more kinds of organisms which in turn are being eaten by several other organisms. So instead of a straight line which is seen in a food chain, the relationship can be shown as a series of branching lines which is called a food web. So what is a food web? Food web is an interconnection of various food chains. Various food chains here are combining and interconnecting at various points to form a food web. Okay. So this conclusion we will see after the flow of energy. Next we have is the flow of energy. Now we know how there are interactions between various biotic and abiotic organisms. Now we need to learn that how is the energy flowing in this food web. Okay, so now we have the flow of energy in an ecosystem. Now we know what a food web is. Now let us see how is the energy flowing in this ecosystem. I told you that sun is the supreme source of energy. All the energy we have is from the sun. Nobody else can generate any energy. The sun is the main source of energy. So sun gives us energy, and this energy can only be trapped by the autotrophs, as we know. So there are only the autotrophs, the plants and certain bacteria which can capture the energy of the sun and convert it into chemical energy which can be further used by us. So the autotrophs capture the energy present in the sunlight and convert it into chemical energy. This is the process of photosynthesis. So by photosynthesis, they capture the energy and they convert it into chemical energy. The green plants in a terrestrial ecosystem capture about 1% of the energy of the sunlight that falls. Okay, so here I have an example for you. So we know that every day sun gives us a lot of energy. So a lot of energy is being supplied to the leaves of the plant. But only 1% of this energy is actually converted to chemical energy and can be used as food. Only 1% of this energy which is being transported. So here we have the green plants in a terrestrial ecosystem capture only about 1% of the energy of the sunlight that falls on their leaves and convert it into food energy. So assuming that there is 1 lakh kilojoules of energy, energy is measured in kilojoules. Assuming there is 1 lakh kilojoules of energy, only 1% of it is converted into chemical energy, and now the plant has 1000 kilojoules of energy. So initially the plant is receiving this much amount, but only 1% of it is actually absorbed and converted into chemical energy and is used as food. So only 1000 kilojoules of energy is actually used as food energy. So now out of this 1000 kilojoules of energy which the plant has converted into food energy, out of this as well a lot of energy is used for various metabolic activities of the plant. Like the plant has to respire, the plant has to do photosynthesis, the plant has to grow, reproduce. In all these metabolic activities, energy is used from this 1000. So you can say 90% of the energy is used, and overall only 10% of energy is left. So when a primary consumer eats this plant, only 10% of this energy is transferred from the plant to the primary consumer. So let us say 10% of 1000 is 100 kilojoules is transferred to the primary consumer. Then out of this 100, again 90% of the energy will be used by various metabolic activities of the primary consumer. The consumer has to grow, it has to reproduce, it has various other metabolic activities, it is used there. And out of this 100, again only 10% is left and is further transferred to the next trophic level, and we have only 10 kilojoules of energy which is further transferred to the next generation. Then again this is also used for various activities, and only 1% of 1 kilojoule of energy is transferred to the final tertiary trophic level or the tertiary consumers. So at last we can see that the energy flow of energy is such that energy is decreasing as it comes to the top. This is why we have limited number of trophic levels. We have only 3 to 4 trophic levels because the energy keeps on decreasing. Now to the third trophic level we do not have much energy left, so let us just read it out now for further understanding. So the green plants in a terrestrial system capture about 1% of the energy of the sunlight. So here it is capturing 1%. Out of this 1%, maximum percent is used in various metabolic activities like respiration, etc. Only 10% is left and it is transferred from one trophic level to the other trophic level. Only this 10% left is transferred from one trophic level to another trophic level. This gives us the 10% law. This is the 10% law. What does it state? That an average of 10% of the food eaten is turned into its own body and made available for the next level of consumers. So only 10% of the energy is made available to the next level of consumers. The loss of energy at each step is so great that very little usable energy remains after 4 trophic levels. This is why we do not have more number of trophic levels. So this question can come that why we do not have more number of trophic levels. The reason is because the energy loss is so great that we do not have much usable energy left. So we have only 3 to 4 trophic levels in an ecosystem. So now we have these very two important conclusions from the flow of energy. First conclusion is that the flow of energy is unidirectional. That is, energy cannot be bidirectional. If this means that if sunlight is giving energy to producers, the producer does not give energy back to the sunlight as well. Or if energy is being transferred from producers to herbivores, it cannot be transferred from herbivores to producers as well. So flow of energy in an ecosystem is always unidirectional. It flows only in one direction, as you can see here. Secondly, the energy available at each trophic level is diminished, means it gets reduced progressively due to energy loss at each level. So this we have seen that due to only 10% of transfer, the energy loss is so significant that the energy at each level is very less. Okay, so that is why the number of organisms at that level is also less, and the number of trophic levels in general are also very less. So these are the two important conclusions from the flow of energy. So now we know what an ecosystem is, the various components of the ecosystem. We know how the energy is flowing in an ecosystem. We know what a food chain, a food web is. Now that we know all these things, we also know that various of our activities are contributing to the ecosystem. We are also a part of the ecosystem, and various activities of us impact the ecosystem in a negative way as well. So we know that we are causing a lot of pollution which is impacting the environment. So one of this effect which is hugely seen, and it is a very significant effect, is the ozone layer and its depletion. So what is ozone layer? Let us start by it. So this is the earth, and the earth has a blanket of layer above it which is called the atmosphere. In between the atmosphere we have a layer which is called the ozone layer. So ozone is a molecule. Okay, ozone or O3 is a molecule which is formed by three atoms of oxygen. So we know that we have seen O2 gas. O2 or the oxygen gas is a very important gas for our survival. But O3, which is ozone, is a poisonous gas. But at higher altitudes it acts like a shield for us. So this is at a very high altitude. At very high altitude we have, so at high altitude we have a lot of ozone molecules in this layer. In this layer we have a lot of ozone molecules right here which are present. So these molecules act as a shield for us. Okay, how do they act as a shield? So we have the UV rays of the sun which are coming towards us. They protect us from the UV rays. Now why do we need to be protected from these UV rays? What are the effects of UV rays? So UV rays are highly damaging to organisms. These UV rays can cause skin cancer and various other diseases in human beings. So this is the effect of UV rays. So we need to be protected from the UV rays, and the ozone protects us from the UV rays. Now how is this ozone forming? So naturally oxygen occurs as O2. Oxygen does not occur as O3 naturally. So with the help of UV, this oxygen present in the atmosphere is broken down into nascent oxygen. Nascent oxygen means two free molecules of oxygen. Now this one free molecule of oxygen fuses with another oxygen molecule which is available in the atmosphere and forms an O3 or an ozone molecule. So this is how ozone is formed. We have the UV rays which break our normal oxygen, and it breaks it into nascent oxygen. The nascent oxygen fuses with the oxygen molecules and forms ozone. So this is how ozone is formed. So after understanding the importance of this ozone layer, we should know that the ozone layer is constantly depleting. Why? Because of our activities. So a decrease in ozone layer began sharply in 1980s. It was sharply observed in the 1980s that the ozone layer is depleting, and there are various ozone holes being formed. So there are various regions where there is a hole in the ozone. Okay, so why is this being happened? Because of CFCs. What are CFCs? CFCs are chlorofluorocarbons. These are chemicals which are released by refrigerants and fire extinguishers. So we have air conditioners, we have refrigerators, fire extinguishers at our homes. So these CFCs are used in these refrigerants, air conditioners, and in the fire extinguishers, and these are released into the atmosphere. So after being released in such huge quantities, these chlorofluorocarbons disintegrates this ozone and causes a depletion in the ozone layer. So in 1987, the United Nations Environment Program, which is the UNEP, in agreement gave us an agreement to freeze the use of CFC. They said that if we need to stop this ozone depletion, we need to freeze or stop CFC production. We should not use CFC. So now it is mandatory for all the manufacturing companies to make CFC free refrigerators throughout the world. So here we are trying to minimize the use of CFC so that no further depletion can happen. So this is about ozone layer and how it is being depleted constantly. One problem was the ozone layer depletion, which was due to human activities. The other problem is waste disposal. So we constantly use various things, we constantly generate waste, but we don't know how to dispose of this waste. And at last, we inefficiently dispose of this waste, and this waste is lying here and there in the soil, or we dispose of in the water, or some factories emit their harmful gases in the atmosphere, so that results in air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution. And often at times we see that various plastic bags are being eaten by various stray animals, so that is causing harm to the stray animals as well. So the disposal, the improper disposal of waste is also a very serious environmental problem. So waste is generally of two types. We are divided into two types: biodegradable and non-biodegradable. Here is a difference between them which covers everything. So biodegradable waste, biodegradable, again break the name and you'll find the meaning. So biodegradable waste is bio means life, degradable means it can be degraded. So biodegradable waste is the one which can be degraded. How will it be degraded? The decomposers we know are responsible for degrading various things. So it can be degraded by the decomposers. Non-biodegradable are they cannot be degraded by the decomposers. So substances that are broken down by biological processes are said to be biodegradable. Substances that are not broken down in this manner are said to be non-biodegradable. So after breaking down, it can be converted into manure and it can be recycled. Okay, it can either be reused or so let's see an example. If we have waste paper and wood crumbs, we can reuse it to make another paper, we can recycle it to make another paper, and finally if we can't reuse it, we this can be broken down by the decomposers and by various biological processes, and they can be converted into manure. So that is why they are called biodegradable waste. They also have their effect on the environment. So the negative effect of the biodegradable waste are that biodegradable waste, when they are degraded, they cause foul smell in the environment. And the second one would be they can be a breeding ground for various mosquitoes. So wherever there is a collection of these biodegradable waste, there can be mosquito breeding. So these are the two effects of biodegradable waste on environment, but overall biodegradable waste are better and suggested rather than the non-biodegradable waste. So coming to the non-biodegradable waste, they cannot be broken down, as we know. Why cannot be broken down? Because these are inert. Okay, they are so strong that they cannot be broken down. Hence, what is the option left? They simply persist in the environment. They stay there in the environment for a longer time. We know plastic. We use plastic everywhere, but that plastic is so inert that it cannot be broken down by the decomposers, and that plastic stays in the environment for millions of years. Every year from the ocean we have such a huge amount of plastic which is being taken out from the ocean, because there is plastic in the ocean beds as well, and there are tons and tons of plastic lying there. So it also has a very negative effect on the ecosystem. So we have various effects and worse effects of non-biodegradable waste as well. Some of them are okay, let's start with the second point. So these biodegradable waste can enter the food chains. How? So we use pesticides, various pesticides are used, and often at times these pesticides have various toxic compounds. So through the plants, these can enter the food chain. Through the producers, these pesticides and these toxic elements can enter the food chain. And for example, it can get biomagnified. Biomagnified means if there is one organism, it is eating 10 plants. Each plant has one toxic element. So at last, the organism which is eating those 10 plants has 10 toxic elements. That organism is further being eaten by the secondary consumer. So again, the secondary consumer is eating 10 such organisms. So at last there's accumulation of toxic waste, toxic elements is getting accumulated. So the tertiary consumer has the highest number of toxic elements because it has so much of toxic elements in it. So okay, so the other effect we have is that these pesticides or insecticides, they affect the fertility of the soil. They affect, when released in water, they affect water as well. They are not degraded. So we have these plastic bags, plastic cans, which are eaten by stray animals as well. Okay, so all these are the negative effects of the non-biodegradable waste. So this is the second problem which is caused by the human activities. And I think that's it for the chapter. Thank you so much for listening to it. I hope you got everything which has been told. So this chapter is a monotonous chapter and it is a very lengthy chapter when read by the book. I have covered all the important points. I just suggest you people to read the chapter, just go through it once and you'll understand everything. The notes and the PPT are available in the description section, and for any further help you can always visit our website. Thank you so much and have a good day.